Good, everybody. My guest today is Steve Travellini. Steve, did I pronounce that right? Actually, I'm going to
Yeah,
interrupt
it's
myself.
Travellini.
I
You
love it.
nailed
Good.
it.
Steve Travellini, who most recently ended a great run at Link Squares, where as CRO, he led growth from 500K to over $50 million in revenue in just over 5.5 years. I should also mention that I noticed he was recognized by Pavilion in 2023 as the CRO of the year. That's definitely GOAT status here on the show and the first of its kind. So that is fantastic. And he's now the founder of WinRate, which we'll get into in a moment, which helps software sales teams improve their win rates, which is a great name for a company named WinRate. Steve, welcome to the Goats of Growth.
Thanks, Jay. Happy to be here. This is awesome.
So let me just start with what we were talking about before I hit record, which is that I am, I'd say, insatiable or endlessly fascinated by sort of origin stories, if you will, and where things and how things get started and where that, you can call it an inflection point or pushing the flywheel so things finally get in motion. And I feel like when people hear the kind of success that I just read, they automatically think, "Oh, geez, this guy's lucky. I wish I worked for for Link Squares." As if all of the effort that you put in, all of the strategic thinking that you put in, was didn't matter, right? In other words, it was going to happen anyways. And I've been doing this long enough to know, and talking to enough people long enough to know that that is certainly not the case, right? And that what you did there matters. So let me just back up even slightly before Link Squares and ask you, what were you doing before joining Link Squares?
I was getting fired from a yeah, yeah. So it's not a glamorous story while you're living it, but
Yeah,
when you play the rewind, you always look at the highlights.
of
I,
course.
I was at a company called Onshape. It was a Massachusetts-based startup out of Cambridge. It was sexy. It was Andreessen Horowitz, NEA backed. They had raised over $100 million before selling any software. So this is a pre-revenue,
Mm-hmm.
like basically unicorn, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they brought in a former sales mentor of mine. I joined him, and we built the first sales team there. And after 2-ish years of building that out, we got to around 7 million in ARR. I got fired. We weren't growing fast enough, and the business was optimizing for an M&A event that happened a year later. But it was a little deflating at the time. My old boss, he was amazing. He was captain of MIT's blackjack team. His name was John Hirschtick. He's like a legend in this mechanical design space, and
Wow.
I learned so much from him. He was the CEO there. He actually told me he thinks that I'd be better at a big company, like an Oracle or something like that, with like a big sales team. He thought that was more my game. And he told me, but he said at the very end, he said, "I don't think you're a startup guy," right? And I was like, "Oh," because I thought I was a startup guy, right?
Right, right.
So I sat on his advice and I stewed on it a bit, and then I joined a 10-person startup called Link Squares, right, to prove him and everybody else wrong that I could do this, from the beginning.
So let me ask you this then. What was it that was in you or about the way that you were feeling in that moment that told you that he was wrong and you were right, even though you just had, I don't know if you can even call that a failure because you got to, 7 million in ARR for the company that had no revenue before. But
Right.
talk to me about your thought process and your mentality there.
Yeah. So it was the first time I'd ever been fired, right?
Mm-hmm.
And layoffs are common and people go through it. That was the first time in my career. So it was an ego shot. Um, I understand it now. I mean, it was the only choice now in retrospect for him as a leader, I think. And I think his advice was well intentioned, right? I don't think he was trying to get under my skin. I think he's an incredible human being and a great leader. And I think he was, looking out for me. But at the time, I was kind of reflecting on what I wanted to do with my career and what I had fun doing. And, I said, no, thank you. But it was all well-intentioned stuff. But the chips that we find to put on our shoulders, so to speak, sometimes are needed if you're going to take on a big, hard thing like a startup.
One more question regarding that before we get into Link Squares, which is that were, as you look back at it, and maybe when you were self-assessing, were there things that you thought like, man, like if I had only made this decision sooner, or if I had only, who knows, right? Where you could have accelerated the growth to the point where they wanted it to. And frankly, going into Link Squares, did you have that in mind, or were you thinking about that when you got to say $7 million or $10 million at Link Squares?
Yeah. No, Jay, it's a great point. So as I was evaluating opportunities and looking at companies, Link Square stood out to me because it was outbound primarily. It was 500K in outbound founder-led sales. And I was excited about the space and legal tech. I understood the technology. It wasn't like a super high barrier to entry at a technical level. It just made sense, right? And the product demoed well, and I really liked that. Onshape was so different. It was complex. Mechanical design software is really, its own religion amongst the techies. CAD software is a very specific niche category, and it was 100% inbound. So it was 9,000 to 10,000 free signups were happening a month at Onshape. Wow. So our challenge wasn't demand. It was siphoning through that demand to figure out who was worth our time to call, right? And it was more of like an SMB sale at that stage of the company's growth. So it was high churn as well. It was just a totally different bag of worms that I had never experienced before. Grateful that I did, because I learned a lot about inbound lead scoring and, a whole playbook there. But I was excited to get back to what I like as a seller, right? I was a BDR, SDR, account executive, all of those different positions. And I loved outbound. I liked cold messaging. I liked trying to figure out how to break into accounts. I liked all of that, creating something from nothing. Spear phishing, instead of what I like to call like the Bubba Gump approach, right? Where you have the huge nets out and you're just going and siphoning through millions of leads. So that's how I was thinking about it, right? Get back to my core, get back to the basics, product I understand, and, let's rip it.
I just was at a pizza place the other day and Forrest Gump was on in the background. So that's very interesting. So, okay. So now you're at Link Squares. They've got 500K in revenue. It's an outbound model. What did the team look like? And also, what were they hiring you to do? Like, in other words, what was the vision at the time there? So I guess what state were they in? And then what was the vision? And what were you tasked to do?
Yeah, so the company had 10 full-time employees and 3 or 4 contractors at the time. There were 3 people on the sales team. They're all very green entry-level account executives that were being shown the way by the founders, right? Who weren't salespeople, right? They were different backgrounds, but not what you would expect in like a professional sales acumen and foundation. I walked into a company that was basically subleasing an office space from another company who was downsizing. So they had some extra desks and they were trying to pay the bills, and they were renting out the space. There was these horrible bright red carpets and bright red chairs. Everything was bright red. And this was like Game of Thrones time. It was like 2018. So we called that office the Red Wedding. And the sales team was in this little cubby, and they all had headphones on, and like the lights were off, and there was just like emails happening. There was no phone calls. There was no buzz whatsoever. So I walked into a company that had figured out how to, in that environment, sell 500K of fairly reputable logos. And I was excited. I was like, okay, they really have no idea what they're doing yet. And just a little bit of process, a little bit of structure, and a little bit of coaching is going to go a long way. And I was super excited about that. But it meant that I had to lead from the front. So I had to, put on the headset. I had to figure out the messaging for cold call pitches. And I had to rework like demo and all that good stuff when I got there. So it was just getting back to basics. I had to be an SDR and an account executive again to be successful as their new VP of sales, which was the role that I started as.
And was there a revenue goal, a new logo goal, a a goal to add another additional headcount? Like what were the numbers, so to speak, or
There
what did
really
you need?
weren't
Yeah,
there weren't any numbers, right?
yeah,
That was kind of the funny thing. There was loose goals like, hey, it would be great if we did this,
hmm
like very suggestive, but nothing that was highly structured by any means.
hmm
It was a yeah, we got to raise some money soon because we're running out of cash, like the family and friends money
yep,
that was taken on early was kind of running out, and they
yep,
were trying to hire and invest in the growth. They saw the fit, right? They had the
hmm
conversions, they figured out the sale,
hmm
but they weren't quite there on specific revenue targets. But we got from the 500K in ARR to like 1.2 million about 6 months
okay, good.
by putting in some basic fundamentals and hiring a couple extra people on the team on the sales team,
hmm
and started to take off from there. But I would say 2019 was our first year with like real metrics, real goals. We were trying to go from 1 million to 3 that year. We ended up almost getting to 4 million by the end of 2019.
So let me ask you this. I want to talk about some of what you figured out early, but I also want to talk about the money that you raised, which I believe after friends and family would have been a seed round. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
That seed round, where was revenue when you raised that seed round? And while you were trying to raise that money, were the investors saying, well, it would be great if we saw growth at this rate? Or what was what were they looking for, I guess, in order to say, okay, we're going to give these guys some money?
Yeah, so there were a few unsuccessful Boston area seed round pitches that I was a part of.
Okay.
And a lot of companies were, interested in the space. They were interested in legal tech.
hmm
It's a newer category. Like the in-house legal team at a company is like the land that technology forgot, right? And they're having their
hmm
moment right now.
hmm
So VCs liked it. There were many people that were interested in it. I think questions early were, are these the right people to attack this problem? Right? Nobody on the founding team and or that early stage team
hmm
was, a legal background type of individuals. There were some, savvy advisor type of things that the founders had set up, but I think it was a founder market fit evaluation. Also, even then, even in those early days, it was highly focused on competitive. Like, why isn't that company going to crush you? Why isn't this company going to crush you? And those were the things that we had to work through.
I want to stay with this for a moment, but I will
Yeah.
come back to the process of sales. But do you talk to me about those meetings where you weren't able to raise, right? In other words, where you failed, I guess. What do you remember about them? What were how would you rate your own um, uh, presentation ability when you're pitching those folks? And yes, take me inside the room.
I think all of us that were in those pitches would say that we're a lot better now than we were then.
Yeah,
And we learned a lot. Like certain people on the team were better for the pitches. Other people, started to stay home, right?
yeah,
And like we started to figure out who the pitch team was, and that
hmm
evolved even over time, right? For the first call, that started to evolve greatly
hmm
towards the later rounds, the BC type of rounds.
hmm
Um, I remember feeling at the time like a lot of people just didn't believe in us. They were looking
hmm
down on us, and it really stunk because I knew what we had on the team. I knew who we had in the room, and everybody at the time was
hmm
incredibly motivated and willing to do anything, roll up their sleeves, and everyone was fighting super hard every day, day in, day
hmm
out.
hmm
Um, but I think we started to learn quickly about the questions that people had and the sticking points during those pitches, and we started to tune them up. And I remember our successful seed pitch was with Hyperplane out of Boston, John Murphy and Vivian Murto and those guys. Great people, great group. And we were doing the presentation. It was our CTO, our CEO, and myself. And we were in this like little arena type of almost like an auditorium where they had like 3 tiers of seating, and they were all sitting at different tiers, kind of peppering us with questions. And I just kept asking our CEO to go back to the logo slide, right? Like these are the companies that have bet on this little startup. They're amazing logos like Pegasystems and DraftKings and there was just so many logos at the time, even in that early like 500K batch of customers that were so impressive. And it was like, you guys are getting in your heads like, this is a seed stage investment. Look at these companies that have bet on this team, right? And we just kind of lingered there. And eventually, for whatever reason, they said yes, which was great.
I was recruiting, so I know Chris Combs obviously well.
Yeah.
I've known him for quite a while. I was doing some recruiting back then, and I think somebody from DraftKings, weren't they on the board at the time? Maybe they still are. I don't know, or not. Or maybe they were an advisor or something.
Yeah. So there were these early advisors that were super helpful. Tim Perilla was an early advisor. He was general counsel at DraftKings. Amazing guy. One of my favorite colleagues from LinkSquares. And he ended up joining later, right? So the pitch team evolved from being like Eric Alexander, our CTO, Vishal, our CEO, and myself, to later stage, it was like Vishal and Tim, right? Because Vishal was the CEO of this great, fast-growing company, and the numbers spoke for themselves. And then Tim was that market validation later, that like, hey, founder market fit, Vishal knows what he's talking about, right? And I'm the CLO from like the best brand ever. That definitely helps. So he joined as our chief legal officer and made a huge impact on LinkSquares because, he obviously as a persona that we're selling to, helped to, bring some of that to the company.
Got it. All right. Let me go back down to the nitty gritty for a minute here.
Yeah.
What did you learn as you started leading from the front, right? Talking to customers, making the calls, sending the messaging. What did you learn that you realized was duplicatable, repeatable, and eventually scalable?
I learned that our product was highly differentiated. And as a seller, that is something that is just so incredibly valuable. It's a pattern interruption, right? So you're making that phone call and immediately they think that they know like what you're going to be calling them about. Another legal tech company must be another, approval software, like that early stage, help you get something signed, workflow type of tool. That was what was popular in the market at the time. We were the first company to have AI on the back end, meeting your contract repository. So we would bring structure to years and years and years of contracts that had accumulated and be able to extract out important dates and clauses and things like that with AI. And no one was calling with that angle and that pitch. And that got us a lot of meetings. Right. So immediately I recognized, okay, like we've got something special here. There's something valuable that we have that other people don't have. And then we scaled that, go-to-market message.
Got it. Okay. And you started with 3, I think you said 3 sales folks, and then you had, I think 10 in total and some contract folks. At what point did you start adding to the team? And at that point, were you considering things like culture fit in terms of the way people sort of show up to work every day and the attitude that they have? Were you looking at other sort of experience? Just give me a sense of how you started to build the team.
Yeah. So at that point in time, I was trying to figure out what wasn't working and why it wasn't working. And luckily we had a sales rep who was doing really well, right? He was doing like 80% of the sales. And took a double click on what it was that he was doing and started to replicate that playbook, bring some structure to it, bring the, learnings from, having done this at a few different companies to that to help that individual do, the best work that they could, but also to then through that person teach the other reps. Right. Someone who is going to be like your North Star, what they call it, early stage, like your special rep. Right. We had that special rep at LinkSquares. His name is Lyle, and he just did a phenomenal job, like incredible job at selling to this persona. So then I took what I know about building sales culture, because there wasn't a great sales culture early. There wasn't a great, set of processes that were scalable. I took some of those successes and then hired up a team and replace people who weren't a fit, right? There were a whole bunch of people there that hadn't closed a deal in a year and, tried to replicate the playbook and it just wasn't clicking. And then I went out there and looked for people that were super hungry. I'm not necessarily someone that hires for experience. I hire for intangibles. I hire for grit, I hire for people that have a contagious, optimism and positivity, right? Because times are hard in sales, and when you have a room of energy givers that really can turn the tides and keep that negative toxic spiral at bay, it becomes a lot harder when you get bigger. But in the early days, it was just all prioritizing attitude and people that were willing to, push themselves outside of their comfort zones, try new pitches, and folks that wanted to just, keep the lights off and just do emails only didn't last long, right? So we brought in our people and we built it out.
And you said you went from what was it, 1.5 million to 3+ million, and from 2019 to what was? Give me the time.
So we closed 2018 at like 985K. We thought we were actually over 1 million, which is a funny story. We just didn't recognize the revenue correctly, and we figured out in January that we didn't hit the ARR milestone. It was funny. Like we had like these like $1 million sunglasses made and all this stuff, and we actually weren't even at 1 million. But yeah, so we ended the year at like 980,000, and then we finished that year at 3.8 million.
3.8 million. Okay. Yeah. And then talk to me about what did the team look like then at that point, at the 3.8 million mark? How many?
Yeah, I think at that point in time, we had eight or nine account executives, and we had probably 5 or 6 BDRs. And we were starting to bring in additional leadership help. At that point, I brought in Rob Flynn, who is someone that I've worked with at a number of companies, great Boston sales leader. I actually learned a lot about software sales working on one of Rob's teams. We've worked together since, but brought him in at the end. So we started to have the top line capacity to be able to scale out and hire more, going into 2020.
What about some of the, and I'm asking this question with, let's say, an early stage founder, maybe expeditionary sales leader in mind who might be listening to this. What were some of the perhaps bottlenecks that you went through or hit as you were going through that, 1 million to 3.8 million dollars or what have you? Like, what were some of the sticking points, and how did you unstick them, if you will?
Yeah. So my entire approach and the thing that I try and teach to folks on my teams is like, we got to figure out what works, and we have to do what works. We can't just do the thing that we think is right because it worked at the last company. We're always in experimentation mode, and you have to, look at what's not working, look at the data, and try and make great decisions, and then kind of run with them. So to answer your question directly, that's like the mindset. But in 2020, obviously the pandemic happened, and everybody had to go home. We were very much a big in-office culture. When you're hiring more of the entry-level sales talent that is on intangibles and not like experience, those folks you can bring along much faster when you're all together in a room. Like it would have been really hard for me as an SDR to learn what I did, doing it from my living room and not hearing the other people and like the active chatter. Later in life, once you have accumulated some of those skills, right? The peace and tranquility of focus of your home doesn't necessarily impact your performance as much. Right. But that was big, and it was a big shift for us. And we looked at the data as we hit that chop, and we were looking at conversion rates of opportunities from demo to close one, all the different stages, like scheduling a qualification call or discovery call, to how many of those are held, go to the demo. And we just looked at our SDR scheduled activity and our AE scheduled activity. And it was like abundantly clear AE self-sourced activity was 3 times the conversion rate of anything that the SDRs sourced. So at that point in time, I didn't necessarily believe it was this huge divergence in skill set between the SDRs and the AEs. Most of the people had only been there for 6 to 12 months, right? It's a startup. So we had AEs that were new, we had SDRs that were new, and I made an experiment with the leadership team. Let's take our top performing SDRs. We're going to keep them, but just make them AEs. And we're going to keep our top AEs, obviously, keep them in seat. But the difference now is that they're not going to have SDR leads. Everyone's just going to do self-source leads. And we're going to find out real quick if this, methodology works for us for right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we did that, and all of the SDRs started converting their own self-sourced activity as account executives. And now we had to teach them a lot about how to work the qualification and the demo and proof of concept trials and how to close and pricing discussion, commercial presentation, ROI, all of that. There was a lot of work that we had to do to get them accelerated, but they were converting at 3x on the meetings that they were handing over to AEs just a few months before that were converting at 1/3. So at the time, we were one of those shops that moved away from the SDR program and actually came back to it later because the data changed and the landscape changed. And we brought the SDR program back at the same time that a lot of companies out there are saying SDRs are dead because of AI and stuff like that. We actually swerved back. So like, we were never really doing things as a company that were trending. We were just focused on doing the things that were working for us right there, right now. So that's one thing. Another thing was specialization of roles, right? We're talking about SDRs and this and that and AEs and hiring people, and you got to get them trained on things. And it's like when you're hiring somebody for those intangibles like grit and optimism, like you have to teach them how to use software. You have to teach them your industry. You have to teach them how to do sales, period, right? You have to teach them so many things at the same time. For us, we found that teaching the product in depth at like a very deep demoable level was too much of a barrier, right? So we needed to bring in sales engineers, right? So we tried to bring in a sales engineer who was incredibly successful and like just an amazing sales engineering talent, but very technical. And we found that didn't work at all with our buyer audience. So he shifted into doing onboardings and support and, kept all of everything working after someone bought. But then we started to hire for our version of a sales engineer, someone to run the demo and guide that process. And we realized we needed to find somebody that had that legal background, someone that could speak the language of our audience. The problem was lawyers didn't want to become sales engineers. So me and the CEO, Vishal, we were at his house one day having a glass of wine, and we were like thinking about like, how could we advertise this better? And we came up with the name Technical Solutions Attorney, the TSA, right? So we just used the same exact job description. We added one bullet, was that like you had to have a JD and you had to have practiced in-house or at a law firm. And then we just kept everything else the same and just changed the title. And then all of a sudden we had like tons of applicants, people that wanted to, be sales engineers, technical solutions attorneys at LinkSquares. And that really took off. So those are a couple of those early day things that we ran into and how we got through them.
Oh my gosh, I have so many questions. Before I forget, let me ask you about the TSA agent.
TSAs.
Did that show up in the data anywhere? In other words, could you see it pretty quickly? Like, holy crap! Like we're close. Yeah, tell me about.
Yeah,
that.
I wasn't scaling anymore, and Lyle wasn't scaling anymore. So Lyle was our special rep, who we brought along every step of the way. Still at LinkSquares, doing a great job. He was a sales manager. I promoted him, and we were working on, him running a team, right? And we were dividing and conquering. And basically, if you were going to do a demo, you had to bring on Lyle or Steve. Right. And that is a huge bottleneck, especially as our roles and responsibilities were evolving. We had to find someone who couldn't just do the demo as well as us, but we needed people that could do it better and have that, landing impact with the legal persona. Right. And our more entry level style approach to hiring, obviously wasn't it. So, but we were very effective, Lyle and I, more senior sellers at getting that level of respect on the phone with the audience. And it was just something that we had to figure out because ramping and training on all of those elements, we were doing all the ramping and training on everything else, like the tech stack. We didn't have IT, right? Like during the pandemic, I was driving laptops to people's houses, like around New England, dropping off like new hire stuff, right? So we didn't have the time to do all the demos like we used to across what had become like 12 account executives. And Rob Flynn, who we had hired, I mentioned earlier, he was running talent acquisition. So he was a sales director who was running sales teams, but also he was doing like all the phone screens and all of that stuff for our team. So everybody was just underwater, and we needed the TSAs to bail us out. And we're very lucky that we did, because they became an integral, catalyst. That's what we have, this annual award that we used to call the Catalyst Award that we would give to our top TSA, because they made the whole scientific, experiment and that reaction, the chemical reaction work. Our conversion rates went through the roof. We were up at like 30% demo to close one once we got the TSAs on the job.
What was the ratio of TSAs to account executives?
In the early days, it was one TSA to like 10 or 12, because we just had to start with one. And then I think we got to a point where it was one TSA to probably like 6 to 8 reps, which is a lot for the TSAs. I mean, the TSAs were just burning the candle at both ends. We never really figured out how to balance their workload perfectly. I think a lot of companies face that with their sales engineers, right? It's like, if you're busy and you got a product that has high demand and you have a team that's good at drumming up activity, we had the best team in legal tech at outbound sales. Our reps were setting up 15 to 20 outbound meetings a month that were highly qualified with ideal customer profile, decision makers above the power line, like general counsels, bringing their team forward. Hard meetings to get. Our team was getting them with high attendance rates. And those TSAs were just busy all the time.
Amazing. So many questions to follow up on what we talked about already. Give me what was revenue in 2020 when that all things started to go down in March of 2020? Do you remember?
I think we were at something like 7 million and at 7.8 or something like that. Sounds familiar. And we got to just about 14 million. So we almost doubled that year despite the pandemic and the shift, which was a big exclamation point for us. And then 2021, obviously we know what happened in 2021, right? In 2021, we went ham. Our team was like battle tested, ready to roll. Rob Flynn was out of talent acquisition. He was into running his teams. Lyle had, that special rep was stepping into more of a director role, and he had some serious experience under his belt now on the leadership side, which he just didn't have before. And he was getting better. And then we staffed up and we went hard. And 2021 was a party
for everybody. I believe, us included. I think you guys even called us for a couple of things.
No doubt.
so talk to me. I want to come back to a couple of tactical things, but just give me top line 21 to 22, 23. Give me the what was the, you were at 14 million coming into 2021.
Yeah.
What was it coming out of 21, 22? What was the revenue? And when did you get to 50 million?
Yeah. So we went to 34 million. Right. So we did a double again. And then we were pushing up right to that 50 million number this past year, 23. So amazing. Yeah, it's growth slowed as a percentage, but we had great retention, and customer success was unsung hero at LinkSquares. Like, they did such great work, and allowed us to keep adding runs without too much leaking out the bottom.
When and why did you go back to the BDR model?
So we went back to the BDR model in 2023. So July 2022, everybody hits this wall, right? Interest rates are sky high, but also in our industry, 2021 was a time for fundraising for a lot of companies that were like the up and comers, and they were sharp, scrappy companies like how we used to be before we got big, and they were using modern tech, OpenAI. They were building out AI features, and the product competitiveness of contract lifecycle management was like at its peak at the same time that budgets were squeezing, and we were seeing those win rates come down significantly, right? And we had to pivot. We had to make some moves, and we had to have some unfortunate layoffs, right? We were planning on riding that 2020 train off into the sunset, because we believed in our ability as an outbound sales organization to out execute the market. And it was humbling, right? Humbling for me, I think humbling for a lot of people that were involved in making the decision, because we bet on ourselves. And that was like, how we always were. And I don't think any of us could have changed it, because that's just the way that we rolled. And we had to make those adjustments as a result, which stunk. Then, people are missing quota, right? Because we're not winning as many deals. Things are really competitive at the same time that demand is down. And we start to have this like culture, like blowback, where people are just like not seeing the reason to keep going anymore. Sales culture is this very sensitive thing. And we had employees that were leaving, just destroying us on Glassdoor for a number of things, like, coming after, in office. We were in office culture, and we had explored changing that in 2022, but we kind of held out because we were, still hiring a ton of folks, and we wanted to get them ramped up. We wanted them to be successful. We didn't want to be a pain in the butt. We just wanted to help them get good.
Yeah, right. Sure.
And we also were getting complaints about like working people too hard, and right, we were trying to outwork a problem, right? We were trying to outwork demand being down and competition being super high, and people were like, "Why don't we have SDRs when everybody has SDRs?" And it had been a couple years, right? It had been almost 3 years, to be fair, and like the conditions that once existed in the market for our team competitively, like our team was right? Like we needed to make some more noise with SDRs and get more meetings. We actually needed more meetings. And we had a higher skilled group of sellers who had been there for several years, who could be doing a lot more per rep productivity wise. And instead we were bringing on all these SDRs and splitting up all of the accounts. I mean, we weren't bringing on SDRs. We had the AEs, but like a batch of the AEs were like almost SDR talent level. And they were splitting up the accounts that the AEs wanted. And it just became this like negative thing. And we made the decision to go hybrid. In early 2023, we made some leadership, pivots and moves to align people with, positions that were the best fits for them. And we brought back the SDRs. We looked at the data, conversion rates were down across the board. And now we were going to bet on something else. We were going to bet on the fact that our best people, if we got them more meetings, our stage to stage conversion rates would start to improve. It's almost like the opposite thesis from that early day team in 2020, where everybody was inexperienced. We now had a highly experienced batch of employees. And once we started feeding them meetings, the stage to stage conversions went way up, right? They just were running a way better sales process. People were happier. People loved the flexibility. Our employee engagement went way up. But the real stickler is that, demo to close one win rate, right? And the team did get improvements there, but not enough improvements that would allow us to, head off additional staff augmentations and layoffs and more bummer stuff, right? So we tried, right? And we continue to push forward. And that team, right, that's still there is doing the same thing, right? I know that they are. I hired and trained many of them, and they're probably just trying to figure out what's going to work for right here, right now.
Yeah, fascinating. A couple other questions here, and then I want to get into the rapid fire 5, but I want to talk about win rate in a moment. But sticking with Link Squares for just a moment, how did you evolve from when you first walked in the door to when you left as a leader? In other words, you were leading from the front, making the calls, sending the emails, doing those kinds of things. At what point did you need to step back and sit on top of the organization and just sort of, because it seems to me like you were spending a lot of time on coaching and leading and developing an inexperienced team to get them strong. So tell me how that played out.
Yeah. I think that's like, that's the opportunity, right? For me was learning what that was, right? I wanted to do it from scratch, right? I wanted to build the first real sales culture and scale it and have all the learnings of being the top of the revenue pyramid for a period, right? For me, 500K to 50 million. Okay. So I learned a lot about how to build the early stage, right? And how to get people good, how to pivot, and how to scrap your way and get the wins, and partner with other departments, right? It was very collaborative, and everybody was on the same team, especially in those early days, on figuring out what are we going to build, and what are people saying that are getting onboarded, and you are in the weeds massively, right? But then you
Mhm.
start to raise venture capital. This is like a venture capital like fairy tale, right? Because
Mhm.
you're taking on, we took on $161 million to artificially fan the flames of something that otherwise like wasn't organically happening. Right.
Right.
Our sales team was picking up the cell phone, like picking up their phones and calling people's cell phones and was,
Mhm.
saying, hey, we should take a meeting. Right. It's not like they were
Mhm.
like landing on the Link Squares like page being like, I need to have this thing. Right.
Right.
So we weaponize venture capital to fuel go to market.
Mhm.
And when that's happening, all of a sudden you have to hire a ton of people, and then you're
Mhm.
promoting a ton of people. And I'm a huge advocate for promoting from within.
Mhm.
Um, what I didn't realize was this whole mentality of, as a sales leader, when you go through this, it's like, oh, now we have to work on the business. Right. And
Right.
everybody says that at the same time. Now we're all working on the business, and we're going to delegate and elevate and let our people like take on roles. And it's like, it's just so unfair
Yeah.
because like they need you. Right.
Mhm.
And I wasn't there for people when they needed me because I was letting them figure it out. Right. This is how they're
Mhm.
going to grow as a leader. And I just
Mhm.
don't think I would ever play ball like that ever again.
Mhm.
I think that is like horrible advice and horrible feedback, and leaders
Mhm.
that are just managing like the VPs and they're like, I'm the figurehead, C-level, whatever, right?
Mhm.
Which I was guilty of at points. And
Mhm.
it's because I thought I was doing good work. I thought I was letting VPs do their thing, but I
Yeah.
was giving them way too much leash that they were unintentionally hanging themselves with. And like,
Yeah.
if I was there with them, like maybe we could have figured it out like we did in the early days before things got, gnarly. Right. Um, so it was kind of funny. I was getting coaching from this CEO, publicly traded software company, and we were chatting. And I was like a data wizard. I knew all my metrics, right? I had everything like piped, fundraise ready on the drop of a dime. The
Mhm.
whole funnel understood back to front, like everything was tight at a data level. So my
Mhm.
job became this like data guy type of job, like
Yeah. Right.
analyzing what was happening, but not helping to create,
Mhm.
the strategies that would drive it forward
Mhm.
necessarily.
Mhm.
Not rolling up the sleeves and doing the AE like messaging work. You start to become
Mhm.
like the data guru, right?
Mhm.
Big mistake, horrible mistake, right?
Mhm.
It works if you're at outreach or gong and like the thing is just going to the stratosphere, right?
Mhm.
You got to guide the data, you got to know the data, right? I would
Mhm.
argue that like you could still do that job and still be in the weeds on messaging and things like that and do a great job at
Mhm.
both. But
Yeah.
I didn't stay locked in. I was talking to this CEO of the publicly traded software company, and he was like, Steve, in your career, you're going to learn this, right? Like you think it starts like with all of like the messaging and like the in the weeds, like blue collar work that you were so good at. And then it becomes this like white collar data job of like management and leadership and executive, whatever, reporting. Right.
Mhm.
And then you get to a point in your career where you realize it's actually just back to the basics. And that's
Yeah.
where you should be focusing all along. Right. And you should never
Wow.
take your eye off of that ball. That
Yeah.
is how I've changed as a person and a sales leader. I've lived that story and I
Yeah.
went to that role, and now I'm firmly back here being like, no,
Mhm.
that's a huge mistake.
Yeah. Wow. That is fascinating for sure. Um, so let me just ask a follow up question there. When the team, how many direct reports did you have as it pertains to directors or VPs? Like, what did your front line look like?
Yeah. So when I was at my peak, it was like this super structured like delegation pyramid, which is a
Yeah.
big mistake, right? It was like
Yeah.
I had like the VP of customer success, I had the VP of sales, I had a VP of revenue operations, which like enablement and stuff rolled up to VP of
Yeah.
sales strategy that like took on the TSAs and
Mm-hmm.
also a bunch of modeling activities in addition to the SDRs and stuff like that that we
Mm-hmm.
brought back. And it's like when I broke it up, it was like, no, I actually want to not have like a VP of sales that has like the pyramid. It was like I had like 9 direct reports from sales. This
Right.
director, that
Yeah.
director, like all of these people, and we were
Right.
just in the weeds in a very like big hands-on way, like towards the end, right?
Yep.
And I don't think that that's necessarily the most scalable thing either,
Yeah.
but I think it's a lot better than burying everything under one person.
Yeah.
I think that's just an error.
Yeah. For sure. So let's talk about present day in win rate,
Yeah.
what I alluded to in the beginning. So talk, first of all, what was the impetus for it? In other words, when you left Link Squares, you're like, okay, I'm absolutely going to go in this direction. I'm going to start something of my own. Was it, let me look around and see what kind of other opportunities are out there? Like, talk to me about that. And then what's your vision for it?
Yeah. So I always, my career's been an interesting one. And I love growth. I love taking on new roles and new challenges. Like when I was at SDR, I wanted to be an AE. And then when I was the AE, I wanted to get promoted anyway, anyhow. And then I was more gravitated on like the sales spectrum towards the leadership path. Like I wanted to figure out how to like hire and build and get into the training and scale out like the ops of a sales org. And then as I got into like Link Squares, it became much more. It was building so many more, it's like foundational things like, on the CS side and ops, generally speaking, and onboarding and, all these different talent acquisition before like it existed in the company. You start to build these things and be responsible for different things that you're kind of a novice at. And for me, that's where I have fun, like figuring out things, being a little bit uncomfortable, learning the new stuff. I was never one to be super motivated by like the honing of like the craft where like, somebody wants to figure out how to hit that bullseye, like perfect every single time. I want to like pick up the next instrument, like the next weapon and like figure out how to use it before becoming like the master of one. So I always had this feeling that after Link Squares, I was going to go and build my own company. That was like the next logical progression after like the CRO seat. It was like you could be the founder CEO, right? Which is a totally unique thing because I have only done 500K to 50 million. I have not done 0 to 500K, right? And similar to the chip that I had before, I wanted to prove that I could do 500K and build the first sales team. Now I want to prove that I can do the 0 to 500K, and I'm highly confident I can do it. But I'm not going to lie, I did consider potentially doing the CRO thing for longer because I love it. I do love sales. I do love revenue. I do love taking an awesome product to market and working with sellers, right? Like throwing the rope back over, helping people get ahead in their careers, right? Like teaching them, making bets on people that other people just like wouldn't even consider for an interview. And then seeing them become like an awesome enterprise rep with like a huge earning potential, or seeing them become a sales leader. Like those things are great. And it's like, I'm going to have delayed gratification on the Steve that loves doing that stuff. I want to do that with my own company soon enough, but it's just different, right? So I took interviews. I interviewed with publicly traded software companies that were interested in giving me a chance at seeing a different game, and had a lot of interest there. Then I interviewed with, a couple really attractive, fast growing, like scale up stage where I could take it from the 50 that, they were interested in, CRO role. Like, hey, maybe you could do the 200 journey with us. And I thought about it, right? But I couldn't get out of my head that, this would be a great time to start something for sellers because I've never sold to salespeople. I've sold to IT and security. I've sold to human resources. Oh, yeah. I've sold to mechanical engineers, very challenging. And I've sold to lawyers, right? Crazy. If you want a master class and having to figure out how to deal with tough personalities, right? So I've always wanted to sell to salespeople, right? And build things for salespeople from my perspective of being in the trenches as a seller, as a human carrying a quota that gets hung up on and told, to take a hike. And as a sales leader who's like under the gun, feeling like they can never like do enough to help in the venture, swirl cyclone, right? I feel like I have a well-rounded perspective and founder market fit to address some issues that I see in the market as opportunities that just help bring sales people forward, make their lives a little easier, and win more deals. Because if you can improve a company's win rate, that's what we're called, win rate, it takes care of everything else. And that's what we're focused on.
So talk to me about that. Give me the pitch or the nitty gritty. How are you going to do that with people?
Well, Jay, I'm announcing this for the first time ever publicly here with you.
Go.
So,
I love it.
So you have the beat, the exclusive,
breaking news.
Yeah, breaking news, man. But yeah, so there are so many companies today that are focused at the top of the funnel. Companies are so invested in the technology, the prospecting technology, AI technology, phone numbers, contacts, sequencing to build that funnel. And they're so important. But too few companies are focused on how do you help sales teams convert that funnel that they built at the highest possible level. And that's what we're going to focus on. There are a few specific areas that are a pain in the butt for salespeople that we're currently exploring. I've done 50 product discovery calls in the last 2 weeks. Explaining pricing and packaging has become a pain in the butt for a lot of sellers, and it's a pain in the butt for a lot of buyers, right? It's just hard to get that message across as companies are now optimizing for net retention and going to these multiple lever models, whether it's usage, users, platforms, integrations, right? There's like so many different flavors that it can be tough. We want to absolutely nail that experience and eliminate a lot of the manual work of then having to build quotes inside of a CPQ. I'm not going to get super detailed in the nitty gritty because we're still figuring it out. But the other piece of it is value presentation. How do you actually help sellers in a way that feels plug and play, that feels lightweight, highly customizable, and not some like enterprise grade, bulky ROI calculation that nobody believes? How do you have an authentic, meaningful presentation with a prospective buyer that gives you that edge, right? As a sales leader, I was always hunting for the edges. Everywhere that we could find them, stuff that we could control was everything to us, right? So if two products were of equal quality, they were always going to pick our product. Why? Because the experience that they had with us as sellers was so elevated, polished, clean, professional, right? Insightful, better questions, better focus on what the real problems were. They just knew my business. That gives so much confidence to a prospective buyer that if everything else looks the same, heck, the other products might even have a few edges on you at a technical level, right? But you might get that win simply because it's a predictor, it's a forecast of what that relationship's going to be like, right? So I want to bring what was, $161 million venture tech stack at that pricing, packaging, and ROI presentation level to startups everywhere, democratize that space, because today it's incredibly expensive, it's bulky, and once you actually buy the tools like I did, your reps don't even use them. So that's what we're attacking.
I must have shaken. I shook my head so much there. I was getting dizzy in agreement. Like I was like, you got to stop shaking your head. Your head's going to fall off. Because I agree. I was agreeing with everything you were saying there. Especially like the part about showing your buyers that you know them and how, confident and good they feel about you when you do ask those questions, and really show them that you care about their business in a holistic way as opposed to a transactional way.
Yeah. And you're out there working for them, right?
That's right.
And the company is giving you the tools as a seller to put your best foot forward in a way that just doesn't compare to the other teams that they're talking to.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
It says so much more about the culture of the organization and the people behind it. Right. It really makes you confident. I know that I've bought tools for that reason.
Yeah.
Right? So
sure.
anyways,
There's no question about it.
So I'll have more to come on that. I'm super excited, and I'm trying to figure out what people actually want, right? As a CRO and as a sales rep myself, I'm doing all my own cold outreach, right? And I'm explaining this idea again, like I was with other tools in the past, right? It's like getting back to my roots, and I'm talking to ICs in the front lines. It's changed. The game has changed, and I want to build something for them that feels like a natural extension of what they're looking for, not another tool that RevOps or enablement is jamming down their throat that they just don't find to be a value add. Because at the end of the day, RevOps and enablement don't want to do that either. They want to have tools that were intelligently crafted from people that actually know what sales teams are looking for, right? That are easy to implement, roll out, and don't break the budget, right? That's what we're going after right now.
Fantastic. I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay. We are at time. I hope you have time for the rapid fire 5, or ask you 5 questions.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Fantastic. All right. First question. What motivates you?
That is such a big question. I think I'm a recognition guy, right? Like I like to, make people proud, right? I'm always out there trying to figure out like how can I be the best dad, best husband, best son, and if I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna go all the way. And I want, at the end of the day, people to be like, man, like you did a great job on that, right? That goes so much further than money for me, but it's
Yeah,
like deep and psychological, and it's honest. But yeah, recognition, I suppose.
I love it. It's fantastic. Name a big goal you have right now, and when would you like to accomplish it?
I want to get a paying customer of win rate by the end of August.
All right,
Right,
all right.
because we're just starting the prototyping phase, and we're going to do a beta program for anyone listening. If you're interested in learning more, I'm signing people up for the beta, and I would love to have one customer officially by the end of August. That would be a killer event for us.
Awesome. I love it. We'll make sure that we put a link to winrate.com because the website's winrate.com, right?
Yeah. Oh, you bet.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For
Yep.
sure. Surprised that wasn't taken, by the way. Or was
Oh,
it?
it
Did you
was
have to,
taken. Oh yeah.
oh, you had to pay for it. You had to buy it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I'm in the David Cancel school of brand building, right?
Right. Okay.
We're going
Yeah.
after it.
Well, if you could be in the David Cancel of product building, then you will be absolutely amazing. So
Gosh, I wish.
I know. I know. What's your most preferred way to learn new information to stay sharp?
I love reading. I like reading and experimenting things firsthand, right? So I'm someone that takes a book, digest it. Like I was earlier this year, typical Hardo stuff. I was reading some ultra marathoning books about like how to go from never doing an ultra before to like starting to figure it out, and then like going out there and experimenting with the techniques, right? So I like to read, reflect, and then go experiment.
Mhm.
And I did my first ultra 2 weeks ago. I did
Oh,
a
wow. That's fantastic.
I did a 50K, right? So
Yeah.
it's not just about like reading the book and learning it and then going to practice it. It's then like going to do the damn thing. So
Yeah.
for me, that's how I like to operate.
Congratulations. Let me ask you
Thank
this.
you.
How long after the book did you do the ultra marathon?
The book I finished reading in January, and I was just training mad throughout January, February, and March, and then I
Yep.
did the ultra here in April on April 20th.
That is fantastic. Good for you.
Yeah,
Um,
thanks,
here's
man.
an interesting question that somebody asked that I decided to keep in. I decided to move into the traditional rapid fire five questions.
Let's
So
do it.
it's my favorite one. Who is your favorite character of all time? Could be fiction, could be reality, could be.
Oh, that's a good one. It's a tie between Rocky Balboa and uh, and Qui Gon Jinn from Star Wars. Um, all right, so Rocky Balboa. I grew up in the Rocky movies. I love watching Rocky 3. These days, when Rocky's like made it, he's got the money. He's kind of gone a little soft. He's got to go back and find Apollo and get the Eye of the Tiger back. I'm kind of living that stage, right? There are times in my life where it's like I felt like I was in Rocky 4. I was fighting the Russian, maybe a little bit of Link Squares, going up on 50 million, right? So I like to like orient where I'm at my professional journey with like the Rocky story. Weird, but it works. And then Qui Gon Jinn, highly underrated Jedi, wise. He was the mentor to who I believe is the greatest Jedi of all time, which is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Beat Vader down twice, total legend. Uh, you know, uh, there's nothing better than Obi-Wan, but his mentor doesn't get enough credit, right? So for me, it's always about throwing the rope back over, helping the next people step up. At Link Squares, my number one goal was to build 20 VPs of sales or CROs. I know for a fact we accomplished that, right? But now it's on the time spectrum. It's going to be when they get that role and when they get the chance to show everybody what they're all about. I think if I instilled in them that mentality, there's going to be a lot more Qui-Gon Jinning happening, and a lot more sales leaders are going to get built up. Hopefully, we'll find a lot more Obi-Wans that way.
I must have watched Rocky 3 and 4. 200 times would be maybe on the low end, probably.
Oh God, I love it.
Oh my gosh, my kids alone probably watched some version of Rocky. I'm not even exaggerating. For about 2 months every day, from like at least between two and no, probably 3 and 4. Like rotate between 3 and 4, 2, 3,
Yeah,
and 4. And I'm the same way. Like for me, I have this sort of metaphor, I guess you can use, where I say the Russian is cut. And for me personally, that means like when I finally I was going through a struggle, I met the challenge and I finally knocked it over. I think, and my best friend knows this, my wife knows this. It's like I just cut the Russian. Like the Russian is cut.
Yeah,
Like, yeah.
So good. I love when the Russian's like, he's made of iron. It's
Yes.
like, he's a machine. I'm like, yeah, baby. It's like the underdog. Like you can't beat him.
I love when he finally cuts him and all of a sudden the music changes and like Rocky's looking like it's
that most
it's
epic montages. Yeah. Like when my son, when we were waiting for my son to be born, I was like, Julia and I, my wife, we were talking about baby names. I was like, what about Rocky? What about Apollo? And I was like going through like all of like the names. And she's like, we're not naming our kid after Rocky. Like, all right, fine.
You should have went with Sylvester. Maybe you should have went with
that. Yeah. Sly.
Sly. Exactly. Man, that's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, no doubt.
Number 5, what's your favorite thing to do when you aren't working?
Oh, I just love to spend time with my family. It's like cliche. Everyone's looking for a hobby. Like my hobby is hanging out with my wife and my kids, my sisters, my brother, their significant others, their kids. Like I'm like kind of like a small circle guy. And like we're getting together every weekend, like making pizzas and like, doing stuff like that. Barbecue. I love like having the family over and smoking a few racks of ribs or some beef ribs, some plate ribs.
Man,
I'll get you some barbecue sometime, Jay. I do some mean barbecue.
Let me tell you something. We sound a lot alike because I'm the same way with small circle family. Again, you're right. I've chuckled when you said that everybody's looking for hobbies. I'm not. Like I'm just looking for my family. Like let's roll. Pizza night for us is Saturday night. Daddy makes the pizza. It's like.
We definitely have a lot in common. No doubt.
For sure. Eat barbecue and watch Rocky.
That's it.
I love it. It's fantastic. All right, so I have a bonus question for you. Then I'm going to ask you what question you have, and then I'll get you on out of here. Okay.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Bonus question comes from a previous guest here. If you could have a conversation with any historical figure, who would it be, and what's the one question you would ask them?
Oh, that's such a wild question.
Mm-hmm. Historical figure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a million ways that you could go on it.
That's a tough one.
Yeah. It's like a crazy question. I'm the type of person that like sits on stuff for like ever, and like I think about it. Like I'll text you in a week. No, I think like historical figures. It would be cool. Like I'm split between like Steve Jobs because he was so dynamic. And also, so like, I feel misunderstood, right? Mm-hmm. Because it was like he lived in like the pre-YouTube, pre-podcast world where you didn't get to like take a peek behind the curtain, and you just hear about two things that I find fascinating about him. Number one is the distortion field, right? Like they talk about Steve Jobs where like he would be like talking about these ideas and topics, and it's like you might have come into that conversation totally opposed to that entire idea, like confidently before. But like once you got into his distortion field, he had a way of just like, you were like, yeah, like you're totally right. I would love to experience that and like kind of like maybe pick up something from his charisma or belief or passion. But I would also like to get to know, like, was he really that much of a hard ass? Or is it just kind of misunderstood? Because when you start to manage a lot of people, like you start to like get a view of sales leaders in a different light. And it's like, I know certain sales leaders are just great people that are just misunderstood. Right. Yeah. And it's like, kind of black licorice. You either love them or you hate them. And I would love to get into it with Steve Jobs a bit and push him a little to figure out, like, was he just cold? Right. Or was he actually like really passionate and loving about what he was doing? And, did he like people? Right. Did he like appreciate people and value them and like speak highly of them, even though he pushed them hard? Right. I would love to get into all of that. And then the other one would be General Patton. He was killed in a car crash right after World
Mm.
War II. I think it was,
Mm.
a lot of people think it was a setup.
Yeah.
I would like to, understand like that era, like the quote unquote greatest generation, if you will. Like,
Mm.
the World War II history stuff is always fascinating to me.
Mm.
And that guy put on like such a front of like just sheer masculinity and confidence. It's like, I'd like
Mm.
to have a beer with him and get to know, like, was he just chewing on leather 24/7, or was he a bit of a showman? Like, did he have to
Right.
like put it on for the troops because he had to be somebody that they needed to be, and he knew that, right? Was
Mm-hmm.
there depth there to that character, or was he just like an absolute like Terminator? I would like to get into there and, interview him a little bit.
Oh man, those are I love those. That's fascinating. I don't know if you're a Howard Stern fan, but he does a great job of interviewing, and I think maybe him interviewing General Patton would be fantastic to get to the point about
Yeah.
chewing leather all day, or
Yeah.
is there a real person behind there?
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. Okay, last question, last point, I guess. What question would you like for me to ask my next guest?
Yeah, I think your next guest, if it's a sales leader,
Mm-hmm.
what's the hardest thing about what's your biggest challenge running a sales team in 2024?
Biggest challenge running a sales team in 20. I like that qualifier too in 2024 because things have obviously changed.
Yeah, I'm out of the game right now, so I want to know, like, at least from the perspective of someone who's fresh in the hot seat right now, getting to work on Q2 if they're running a normal fiscal year. Like, what's the things that are keeping them up at night, right? I would love to just hear the open-ended answer to that.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Steve Trevelini. Winrate.com is the new company and the website. Thank you for. Oh, how can people find you? Is it LinkedIn? Do you have an email?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Steve@winrate.com or just on LinkedIn. I'm super active on LinkedIn. Love to connect with people, networking all the time. Right? If you're a sales rep, sales leader, you want to pick my brain, I'm all yours.
Awesome. Well, I thank you for being all mine for the last hour or so here on the Goats of Growth. Thank you, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, and give Steve some love. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, Jay.